Welcome, everyone, to my podcast series, The Holistic Nature of Us. I invite you to take a journey with me into a better understanding of the concepts behind our holistic nature and how that ties us directly to the natural world around us. My intention is to be your guide for this half hour as we begin seeing our world with fresh eyes, gaining more understanding and learning how we can connect the dots in practical ways that we are nature and nature's in us. I feature a broad range of guests deeply concerned about the environmental issues of our time and more, authors and educators, practitioners and others whose passion for this earth and for all species help us create sustainable bridges of understanding. These folks are innovators, action-oriented, creating solutions in a variety of ways that honor us and the planet's holistic nature. And I am so honored to share their stories, their projects, and their passion with all of you. So thank you for joining me today for another engaging interview. And I'm so excited to introduce all of you to Dr. Stephanie Seneff, who is a senior research scientist at the MIT Computer Science and Artificial Intelligence Laboratory in Cambridge, Massachusetts. She has degrees in biophysics and electrical engineering, as well as Ph.D. degrees in electrical engineering and computer science, all from MIT. For over 3 decades, her research interests have always been at the intersection of biology and computation, developing a computational model for the human auditory system, understanding human language so as to develop algorithms and systems for human-computer interactions, as well as applying natural language processing techniques to gene predictions. She has published over 170 articles on these subjects and has been invited to give keynote speeches at several international conferences. In 2012, Dr. Seneff was elected Fellow of the International Speech and Communication Association. In recent years, Dr. Seneff has focused her research interests back towards biology. She is concentrating mainly on the relationship between nutrition and health. Since 2011, she has published over 24 papers in various medical and health-related journals on topics such as modern-day diseases, including Alzheimer's, autism, and cardiovascular diseases, as well as analysis and research of databases of drug side effects using NLP techniques and the impact of nutritional deficiencies and environmental toxins on human health. I first came across Dr. Seneff when she was a keynote speaker in Ocean Robin's Food Revolution Summit that was given a few years ago. And today I've invited her to talk to us about the COVID-19, her glyphosate research on health and our immune system, and how she feels that's impacting us today. So welcome, Dr. Seneff.
Thank you so much for having me.
So let's begin with, let's start with glyphosate and what you feel the key points for us to understand about glyphosate.
Well, glyphosate is the active ingredient in Roundup, which is a highly used herbicide around the world. The United States uses more per capita than any other country in the world. And we also have a very big problem with our healthcare system. We have many, many people who are sick. We have diabetes, obesity, these kinds of autism. All these things are, higher really in the United States than many other parts of the world. And we don't seem to be concerned about what's causing all this rise in all of these conditions. And our government doesn't seem to be concerned. It's just more concerned about how do we pay for all this healthcare. And it frustrates me because I actually believe that glyphosate is a major factor in all of these diseases. And I believe it's true because it has a very unique mechanism of toxicity that has eluded people. People have not appreciated what it can do. It's unique. There's no other chemical in the world that acts the way glyphosate does. This is what I believe. It's a theory. I believe there's substantial evidence to support it from the existing research literature, including from the work of Monsanto's own researchers, the company that invented glyphosate and put it on the market in 1974. So it's been around for over 45 years. And as glyphosate usage goes up, these diseases all go up in step. We have very strong correlations between autism and glyphosate in terms of the temporal patterns of these diseases: autism, dementia, diabetes, obesity, various gut problems like, inflammatory gut, pancreatic cancer, thyroid cancer. All these diseases are going up dramatically. And people say, well, correlation doesn't mean causation. We can dismiss this or so many other things. Well, that's true. But when you try to find something else that matches as well as glyphosate does, I have not found it, and I've been looking and I have not found anything else that matches as well as glyphosate. Because glyphosate is perceived as being non-toxic, we use it generously and carelessly. People don't realize that it's so toxic. Its mechanism of toxicity is insidious because you don't get bowled over by it. When you get exposed to it, you don't immediately get sick. It takes time. It goes into what I believe it's doing, and this is theory. It's going into all the proteins of your body and substituting for glycine in those proteins. So when your body synthesizes proteins, it builds them out of amino acids, and glycine is the smallest amino acid, very, very important in many proteins. It plays an essential role. And it's been, yeah, you want to comment?
Yeah, that's very interesting that you're talking about the pervasive use. I think what I want to just say at this point is I didn't realize that on non-GMO crops it's being used.
Yes.
Now we think of non-GMO crops as having non-genetically modified seed, which is great, but then they put it in the ground and they use Roundup anyway to take care of the weeds.
They use Roundup at the end, in fact, for major crops like oats and wheat and barley and legumes like chickpeas and lentils. Those are testing sky-high levels of glyphosate in the foods derived from those crops because they're being sprayed by glyphosate right before the harvest as a desiccant or as a ripener. Sugarcane is another one. All these crops that are non-GMO are being sprayed with glyphosate right before harvest, which is the worst time. It goes up into the seed. It gets into the foods that are derived from those crops. The highest levels of glyphosate are being found in these non-GMO foods.
So non-GMO simply means it's a non-genetically engineered seed, but it doesn't mean it's organic.
Exactly. And people mix that up. People think, oh, I'm buying non-GMO, it's safe. And that is simply not true. And especially, for example, oats, Cheerios and oatmeal cookies and oat cereal, these things are all highly contaminated with glyphosate. And children, of course, love these products. Things like Oreo cookies and those little goldfish crackers. Those are so popular with the children. They've all been tested and found to have high levels of glyphosate in them.
That makes me sad to see how badly contaminated our food supply is, because if your research is showing it's leading us to chronic diseases. It's just opening the windows for that, depending on our biology. So please continue with your research on glyphosate and how it affects glycine in the body and protein.
Yeah, well, so I think what's happening, glyphosate is a complete glycine molecule. It's actually a very simple molecule. It's glycine. Glycine is the smallest amino acid, only it has some extra material attached to its nitrogen atom. So that makes it very different from glycine. It's bulkier and it's negatively charged and it's highly reactive. So it has very different properties from glycine. And often glycine is selected for its tiny size and for its ability to maneuver. Proteins select for glycine at critical places. And there's been studies that have shown with individual proteins that if that glycine is mutated because of genetic, mutation, you can get severe disease, even sort of non-viable. You can get, the child can die in early life because of a single mutation in a particular glycine in a particular protein. So I've been rummaging through the research literature, finding all the proteins that have critical dependencies on glycine. And it then becomes a story that links to all these diseases that are going up dramatically in step with glyphosate. I've been able to, in many cases, single out the proteins that I suspect are being disrupted in association with the various diseases. And this is how one chemical can cause so many diseases. People say, how can that be, that one chemical could cause so many diseases? This is how it could, by messing up glycine in the protein. So basically, I look at the evidence from the glyphosate research literature, and I look at the evidence from the glycine in protein research literature, and I intersect those two along with the evidence from the statistical distributions of the diseases to see which diseases are going up. You put all that together and you get a remarkable story.
You sure do. I know it opened my eyes to make the correlation between the use of these types of products and the spike in autism. I have a nursing background, and when I was a student nurse, I was fascinated with autism. In fact, one of my case studies was a young woman of 19 who was diagnosed with autism. But that was unusual. I mean, we hardly heard about it. It
Hmm.
was considered a very kind of rare occurrence during the time that I studied medicine. But lately, with the John and Ocean Robbins Food Summit brought to my attention, and your research has brought to my attention, that we went from 1 in 150 to 1 in 50 births with autism, which is huge. I mean, that's a huge strain and drain on our resources, on family health and family life. But I don't see people even recognizing that.
Yeah, and it used to be 1 in 5,000, 1 in 10,000. I didn't know anybody without autism the whole time I was growing up.
No, I didn't either, except when I got into nursing school, and that was, of course, in a mental institution. But there was one, and that's all that I heard about at that time. So, can we talk about our innate immunity and our adaptive immunity, because that leads us into the
Hmm.
COVID virus and what's happening?
It absolutely does. And I had become aware from my research prior to COVID-19 that glyphosate is a train wreck for the innate immune system. There are many proteins that the innate immune system depends on critically, for example, to clear viruses that they have long sequence. There's a whole group of proteins called collectins, and there's several of them, maybe a dozen, and they're part of the immune system, and they're produced in various places. There's a couple of them in the lungs that are in the surfactants of the lungs, and those collectins that are in the lungs are really critical for both for the clearance of viruses and other debris, various debris like from damaged cells and whatnot. They're a cleanup team, and they trap things, that come in from when you breathe in. They trap things and allow the macrophages to clear them. And in particular to clear viruses so that the virus won't be able to multiply and take over your body. And these proteins, all of them, these collectins, have this long sequence of what's called GXY, GXY, GXY. It's a pattern in the protein that has every third amino acid is a glycine. It's a very, very glycine-rich segment in these proteins. It's the same thing that shows up in collagen. Collagen is the most abundant protein in the body. Also has this long sequence of GXY, GXY, GXY. Collagen, I think, is getting destroyed by glyphosate, and that's what's causing the epidemic we're seeing in various problems with the joints, the bones, all the hip surgery and the knee replacement surgery, all these different hip replacement surgery, knee surgery, shoulder problems, back problems, all these things that are causing us to take a lot of opioid drugs to handle the pain. I think glyphosate's a major player in the epidemic that we're seeing in that. So the same pattern, the GXY, GXY, shows up in the collagen, which is like 25% of the body's protein, and also in these collectins, which the immune system uses. There's one called mannose-binding lectin that's been linked to deficiencies in mannose-binding lectin due to genetic problems, has been linked to an inability to fight off viruses. So the proteins in the lungs, the proteins elsewhere in the body that are part of the innate immune system that's able to act like a vacuum cleaner and clean up all the bad stuff in the blood, including the viruses, those proteins are broken by glyphosate and they don't work. And that's what's allowing, I believe, the virus to take off and infect and cause disease.
Well, you made a comment in a recent article that you published that the coronaviruses are the common cold.
Right. They're the cause of the common cold. There's various coronaviruses that cause what usually is just a cold.
So the difference between COVID-2 and COVID-19 is?
Well, this virus actually is a COVID-2. It's it's a little confusing. The disease is COVID-19. The virus is called SARS-CoV-2, I think is what it's called. The virus is 2. But the viruses keep evolving. These coronaviruses evolve very rapidly. That's one reason why it's difficult to design a vaccine for them, because they'll just outsmart the vaccine. They're constantly evolving. It's actually really fascinating, these viruses. I would love to understand the role that viruses play in life, because I believe they play a critical role, and I think it has to do with evolution, that the viruses are the agents of change, that they allow the genetic code to change over time so as to react to various environmental exposures. It makes sense to me, because viruses do mutate quickly, and they are able to integrate themselves into our own DNA. A lot of our DNA actually comes from viruses. The DNA that's in our own bodies comes from viruses. So it's quite fascinating, the research behind viruses. I think this virus may even have evolved to in reaction to glyphosate. I mean, there's a lot we don't know. And so that's all speculation, but it's quite fascinating to me. And I'd love to be I wish I could live another 100 years and find out what new research people have discovered, because it will probably be very, very interesting. I think there's going to be a lot of breakthroughs in our understanding of how biology works in the coming decades, because we are primed for those breakthroughs. We have so much information that's available now so readily to people around the world. It's just wonderful how you can just pick up a paper off the web and read it. Anybody can do that. So people are really, and then people are sharing ideas on the web as well. I think it's a very creative time in our understanding of biology at this point in time.
Well, my understanding is, too, the greatest creativity sparks come from the greatest tension. So here we have this tension created by this virus that's forcing us to quiet down, get off the roads, let the earth breathe a little bit differently, clear the air of some of the pollutions that are out there, and also clear our own inner pollutions of busyness, where now we have more time to be quiet. So I see that as a positive thing happening right now. And then, of course, innovation comes from that deep place of maybe quiet, of our attention turned elsewhere. And then all of a sudden we get that flash of insight. And who knows what's going to come innovative from that,
Very exciting, yeah. Well, so what I discovered in what that paper is about, that's getting a lot of play on. I mean, I'm getting a lot of attention to that paper and feedback from people. That paper, I was curious about where the COVID-19 was hitting hard. Certainly Italy really kind of woke me up when I saw, Italy, the Lombardy region of Italy, where they were getting huge, COVID-19 infection. Many old people were dying. It was quite a dramatic, very big surprise to the world, I think, when Italy got hit so hard. Mm-hmm. And that caused me to kind of look into Lombardy and study, sort of look for things that might connect to it. And of course, it is a city that has a significant problem with air pollution. Europe in general has embraced diesel fuel, for vehicles, including for cars. I think they have something like 22% of the cars in Europe are diesel driven. They're diesel cars. They're driven on diesel fuel rather than gasoline. Whereas the United States, I think, has only something like 2% diesel penetration in our cars. And of course, diesel is also used in the trucks and whatnot. Diesel trucks are quite common in the United States as well. What I had not realized until COVID-19, I had not been aware that there has been an evolution of a technology based on biodiesel fuel. I did not even realize biodiesel existed. I was aware of the ethanol, and the U.S. has been a leader in adding ethanol to gasoline. We get the ethanol from the corn. Brazil produces ethanol from sugarcane, and the U.S. and Brazil provide most of the ethanol that's exported to the world to dilute the gasoline. It's sort of an additive added to gasoline in order to make it last longer, right? To extend to reduce the dependency on oil, basically, through the use of alcohol, ethanol that's derived from corn and sugar. And both the corn and the sugar, of course, are sprayed with glyphosate. Sugar I don't know actually Brazil, but in Central America, there's a big problem with sugar being sprayed with glyphosate right before harvest, causing an epidemic in an unusual kidney disease that I've written about. I've published papers on this, but there are others who have linked that directly to the glyphosate that's being sprayed on the sugarcane right before harvest. The workers who harvest the sugarcane are getting sick at a young age and dying from kidney disease. And so I think there's potential certainly for glyphosate in the ethanol. But when I was looking at the pattern, it didn't look like it matched the ethanol, because Europe has less ethanol in their gasoline than we do in the United States. And, Europe, Italy and France and Spain are all being hit hard. Those countries actually played a leadership role in incorporating biodiesel into the diesel fuel. So it's a mixture of regular diesel and biodiesel. And the biodiesel, Europe has actually been able to produce biodiesel from some of the oils. They come from plant oils like soybean oil, and in the case of Italy, it's the olive oil, because Italy has lots and lots of olive oil. Interestingly, it looks to me like Italy has about 10 times as much biodiesel use in Italy as in Greece. Greece is like around 1/10 as much as Italy, and Greece has a much, much lower problem, much smaller problem with COVID-19 than Italy does. So there's all these different statistics you can see. In the United States, it's particularly interesting because our big outbreak is in New York City, and we have another big outbreak in Louisiana and New Orleans. Those are really two huge hotspots in the United States. And then Washington, D.C. is now starting to get, on fire as well. Those three cities were the leaders in the development of biodiesel in the United States. So I'm sort of seeing this pattern that looks like, again, correlation, right? Mm-hmm. That the cities that are embracing biodiesel. So New York City has something like 11,000 vehicles on the road that are driving with biodiesel fuel as part of their fuel supply. So the biodiesel, in the case of the United States, we've been developing technology that involves taking the remnants. Once you harvest the crop, so for example, corn crop and wheat crop, once you harvest the crop, you have all that residue of just the stalks and all the plant material that's left over after you harvest it. You can take that stuff and gather it up and run it through a biodiesel manufacturing plant and turn it into fuel, into diesel, essentially diesel fuel. It's an amazing process that they do. And the question is whether the glyphosate that's surely on those plants, because, for example, the wheat is sprayed right before harvest, does that glyphosate survive the processing? It's a big question. We don't know the answer. I think a lot of people would say it probably would not, that it would get destroyed by the processing. But we don't know for sure. And it's possible, I think, that it ends up in the biodiesel fuel that then gets, burned in the gas tank of the vehicles and gets released in the fumes, the exhaust fumes of the vehicles on the road, and then people breathe it in. So I'm suspecting, and again, this is all speculation at this point. I'm putting the idea out there, in the interest of getting a chemist to take a look, because we need to do some more studying to find out if this is what's happening. That this has all happened within the last 10 years, the development of this, and it's being increasingly promoted. People are actually thinking they're doing a good thing because the claim is that it would reduce the carbon footprint. So we're trying to reduce the carbon dioxide in the air that is causing the global climate change. So it'll be very, very sad if it turns out that this is a major health problem. The toxicity of this biodiesel fuel, is a contributor to what I would say is that you're breathing in the glyphosate, and the glyphosate's getting into the lungs, and it's causing the lung surfactant proteins to be messed up. And the reason why I zeroed in on that was because of the studies that have been done on vaping. This really tipped me off when I found this incredible paper on mice that were exposed to vaping fumes from the e-cigarettes. And this study was done because they had identified a strange lung disease that was happening among people who smoked a lot of e-cigarettes. And that lung disease has symptoms that exactly match the symptoms of COVID-19. They're very, very well matched, including the dry cough and the lack of runny nose. It's characteristically you don't have a runny nose in both of those, a slight fever, and then breathing difficulties. That's really the key thing, is that, I can't breathe, I can't get oxygen. The oxygen level goes down. The lungs are not working. And I think it's because the surfactants are being messed up by the glyphosate that is in the e-cigarettes. And so I started to look at the e-cigarettes to see, well, what is in them? And it turns out they've targeted something called vitamin E acetate as a possible cause. And vitamin E acetate is derived from soybeans. And so soybeans are GMO Roundup ready soybeans. So you can get glyphosate into that. And then there's also glycerol, which it can be derived from the remnants of the biodiesel food processing plants. So when they get the leftover stuff, once they've extracted the biodiesel, they can go and use that to make glycerol, which can go into the e-cigarette. So there's speculation on my part that it's glyphosate in the e-cigarettes that's actually damaging the lungs. So that's the same thing that's causing the COVID-19. And people who have COPD, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, a study showed an 18-fold increased risk to ending up in the ICU if they caught COVID-19. And so COPD, of course, is smoking is a major risk factor for COPD. And so it sort of all kind of comes together into a story that may or may not be true, but it seems plausible to me, and it would explain why this is happening now, because of this up-ramping of glyphosate. Has been around for a long time, and certainly it's causing autism rates to continue to go up. They just went up by another 10%. It's hardly even news now because we're so caught up in COVID-19, but the U.S. just announced a 10% increase in autism. And, those things are going up because glyphosate is going up steadily everywhere in our food and whatnot, in our water. But this is something new, if it's true, of glyphosate in the fumes of the cars, and that can really impact people who live in cities in particular, and especially in cities where they've introduced the biodiesel fuel. That's what I'm thinking.
Mm. And then you're tracking the demographics, you're tracking the usage of it. You also mentioned airlines that have used biodiesel. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, well, that turns out to be interesting too. And again, this is all stuff I've just been learning in the last few weeks. Since COVID-19 hit, I wasn't aware of any biodiesel, but it turns out that in fact United Airlines was the first to introduce biodiesel, and introduced it first in Los Angeles. So Los Angeles was the first city where biodiesel was used. But at this point, many airlines are using biodiesel fuel, and many of the airlines that service New York City are using biodiesel. New York City has three major airports surrounding Manhattan. The LaGuardia and the JFK, and then also the New Jersey one. So 3 different airports that are major airports surround New York City. So a lot of planes are flying in there all the time from airlines that are using biodiesel fuel for the airplanes. And so I think that's another. And also I've noticed like some of the hotspots out west or in the Midwest or in the West, I guess, in Salt Lake City, Utah, and Denver, Colorado. Those are kind of look like hotspots as well. Of course, these are big cities too, so you have the complication of the vehicle fumes on the road as well as the fumes from the airplane. So we really don't know. It's always a question of exactly which way is the source coming in that's causing the trouble. Another possibility is heating heating oil. I didn't realize until very recently that they're putting biodiesel or biofuel. I don't think it's diesel. It might be diesel. Biofuel into heating oil. And that's also being encouraged lately. Some of the states are sort of promoting it, legislation to give you a tax break if you put biodiesel into your fuel, into your heating oil. And so that now you can think of a possibility of that also producing glyphosate that you're breathing in your home. So I don't know if any of these things are true, but they're all kind of interesting things to think about.
Well, what I like about your research is the fact that it's forward thinking instead of looking at the benefit in the moment versus the benefit in the long run. And that's the piece I see missing in the way our government and our research functions. So, for example, when I went for my master's, I was researching cottonseed oil because it's used in food. But is it really a food or is it a textile crop? And what I found was mind-blowing, and it was very sad for me to see some of the research out there. And I ended up talking to a man from China who was living in America for 27 years, and he worked for the USDA. And he and I got into this incredible discussion about the fact that we're not visionaries when we create things. And if you look at the research on pesticide use in general, just from when it started, products that were left over from the war machines of the First World War and the Second World War. Yeah, and you look at how they're applied, and that you can't have animals near some of these ornamental crops that use certain pesticides because these animals have a very high incidence of miscarriages. And so you have to let the fields rest before you can even graze an animal there. But we're not taught that. I don't think farmers are taught that. So we end up having to pick up the pieces after the fact instead of having that forward vision, is what I'm getting at. Right,
I totally agree. I mean, we always seem to think that what could go wrong? Like there's some new product and it's harmless. I mean, we haven't found it. They don't look for toxicity because they don't want to find it. And then when people start seeing it, they deny it because they're making money. They don't want to shut down the plant that's producing this chemical. They just don't. They're looking at their loss of funds, loss of money if that chemical becomes targeted to something that's toxic. And that's certainly true for glyphosate. And a lot of people are saying, we can't grow food without glyphosate. I mean, that seems ridiculous to me. We did without glyphosate up until 45 years ago perfectly fine,
Yeah, and we did fairly well without any other pesticides up until then, too. Are there going to be problems? Of course. But I believe nature has the solutions for everything that we're fighting in terms of problems with growing food and producing food and fuel on this planet. And we have forgotten to look at nature.
Yes.
So we have places like the Biomimicry Institute, for example, that are looking at nature to solve some climate change problems, and some of their innovation is absolutely fascinating to me.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how mainstream it will get, but they're at least out there searching for ways to use nature to solve climate change problems. So, Dr. Seneff, your research is extensive. The biochemistry is very deep and comprehensive. Can you give us any other insight on your research with the COVID-19? Any kind of tips or some things that we should be mindful of?
Well, certainly, I would recommend that everybody switch to an organic diet if they're not already doing that. Try to minimize your exposure to glyphosate because that will strengthen your innate immune system. What you need is a stronger innate immune system. So eating certified organic is highly recommended. And also, I would say eating sulfur-containing foods because I think sulfur is very, very important for the innate immune system. And it's interesting, things like vitamin D, for example. Vitamin D deficiency is linked to a weakened immune system. I believe getting out in the sunlight, and really paying attention to the sun, to try to get sunlight exposure to boost up your natural vitamin D. Sunlight does more than just vitamin D, and I've written about that. And I think it's crucial, actually, for helping to strengthen the immune system beyond its effect on vitamin D. So getting out in the sunlight as much as possible, take a walk outside. And then eating, natural foods, unprocessed, eat foods that you recognize, fresh fruits and vegetables, meats and dairy and seafood and fish. All of those things are very healthy foods. So stay away from the processed foods. Eat the organic foods and natural foods, and sort of eat a diet that's high in a nutrient dense diet, high in micronutrients.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those are all really wonderful practical suggestions for this time. I know this is controversial, but you did mention in your article about how the use of all our flu vaccines actually diminishes our innate immune response. Do you mind addressing that issue?
Well, that's very interesting. I really wish that somebody were doing studying, like anybody who catches COVID-19, find out their flu shot history. And then especially if they end up in the ICU or if they die, find out their flu shot history, because I suspect, again, I don't know, I'm just guessing, that if you are regularly getting a flu shot every year, you're more susceptible to COVID-19. And that's because, and it's been shown in studies. I remember a study coming out of Hong Kong where they did a controlled study where half the people got the flu vaccine, the other half didn't, and they monitored them for the next 9 months or so. And they looked specifically for syncytial virus infection. And they found a 4-fold increased risk to syncytial virus in those who had gotten the flu shot compared to those who had not. In other words, the flu shot is disrupting your innate immune system such that although it protects you from the individual strains of flu that are in the vaccine, it makes you more susceptible to everything else, including possibly other flu strains. And there's also papers that specifically mention coronavirus, and this is before COVID-19, but there are papers on the flu vaccine that show that flu vaccine inhibits your response to other viruses, including specifically coronavirus. So it leads me to believe that people who've been getting a flu vaccine every year are going to have a greater susceptibility to COVID-19. That research definitely needs to be done, and I really hope somebody will do it.
Well, I have to tell you, this has been a very engaging and thought-provoking discussion, and I can't thank you enough for your time and your sharing and your expertise. I offer a transcript for every podcast, and I will also link your paper that you published recently.
Great. That would be wonderful.
To that, so that might help clarify a couple of points for people who like, to delve into more of the research aspect of it. So thank you. Is there anything else you'd like to leave us with before we sign off?
Stay safe.
You too. Well, everyone, again, I just can't thank you enough for joining us at The Holistic Nature of Us. And again, I do feel inspired by Dr. Seneff's talk and her practical advice. So this is Judith Dreyer. author of At the Garden's Gate book and blog. My book is available through my website, which is www.judithdryer.com, as well as several distribution arms, including Amazon, Nook, Goodreads, and more. I'd like to remind all of you again that a transcript is available for the podcast. We'll make sure we have the link to Dr. Seneff's article. Please like and share them. Let's support each other and get the word out. And remember, now is the time for practical action and profound interchange, so we value our world again. Enjoy your day.